It is really quite rare in the motorcycling world to have significant changes to a brand new platform in just a year's time, but that is effectively what we have here today with the new Triumph Speed T4. Now look at this bike, and yes, it's very familiar to the Triumph Speed 400, but I can tell you that there's a lot of changes, surprisingly significant changes happening underneath, and the biggest of the lot is with the engine. Now the cases still say TR series 400cc, and that fundamental hasn't changed. This is still a 399 odd cc engine. But where the Speed 400 used to make 40 horsepower, this has significantly reduced down to 31. Torque is also reduced, but the margin is much smaller. It's about 36 Newton meters of torque, very small 1.5 Nm drop there. Triumph hasn't stopped there. They've also changed the rear sprocket. It's a lot smaller now, 4 teeth smaller down to 38 teeth. The whole idea behind these changes, the company tells us, is to make this a more city-friendly, relaxed motorcycle with friendlier, gentler throttle inputs. And the biggest change in that regard is a 31% increase in crankshaft inertia, which basically means that this engine isn't as quick revving or responsive as the Speed 400. So how has Triumph achieved this? Well, there's now a new airbox, also much smaller throttle body, and while the Speed 400 has ride-by-wire, this bike goes back to manual cables. You'll see 2 cables out there, so that is simpler, and it has different cams in the head. So if you buy this motorcycle, there's no easily changing it back to 40 horsepower spec. You buy this, you live with it. So let's get to why you would want to buy the Speed T4, and one of the main reasons is how it rides. But before that, let's hear what it sounds like. It is a slightly different exhaust to the Speed 400. Triumph says they try to make it a little more bassy, but yeah, it's very similar. The difference though is in how this moves on the road, and yeah, there's a significant difference. We got to ride the existing Speed 400 around here in the Bajaj premises, and that bike is a much more reactive motorcycle. You open the gas, it reacts. Above 3000 RPM, it surges forward. That is exciting, but it's not particularly chill. And people would expect a modern, retro, classic themed motorcycle from Triumph to have a chill side, which is why this exists. Throttle response is much nicer. Whether it's at slow speed, just easing off the clutch, or even when you're on the move, this feels a lot more natural. I also really like the torque spread. Now this bike isn't as fast as the Speed 400. It doesn't have that rush in acceleration above 4,000–5,000 RPM. It's still a quick motorcycle, and I think this will be somewhere in the 8-second mark for 0 to 100 times. The Speed 400 in our test was about 6.7 odd seconds if I'm not wrong. This will be slower, but it's not a slow bike by any means. However, it's a lot more gentle. It's nicer to ride in traffic, and the torque on the Speed 400 is really good. This is even nicer. The gearing changes also mean that you can carry second gear, third gear at very low speeds. You almost never have to use first gear. You can go over speed breakers in third gear peacefully, down to 20 kph in third. It's all very nice, and the same thing goes for highway cruising. 100 kph is pretty reasonable to hold. It comes at about 5,500 RPM. The bike feels fairly calm, and you can sustain those speeds. There is enough power in the engine to surge up to 120 if you want, but above that, the progress is quite slow. Triumph says the top speed is about 135 kph, but I think you'll see somewhere between 140 and 150 on the speedometer. Nevertheless, it can exist out on the highway. It's really not hamstrung on the highway, but it's lovely in the city. That is what makes this engine stand out. And for me, this engine is even nicer than the Speed 400 in the city. I think a lot of people who want to upgrade from an air-cooled 350cc bike, all those Royal Enfield owners out there who Triumph is trying to attract, will find the T4 to be a lot more friendly than the Speed 400. The other nice aspect that customers will appreciate is that Triumph says this motorcycle will be more than 10% more fuel efficient than the Speed 400. They claim 26 kpl for the Speed 400, and for the Speed T4 they say 30 km per litre. So again, people who just want to ride in a more chilled manner, enjoy the torque, will be happy that this bike will travel further on a litre of fuel. That's the engine taken care of, but there's also a lot of stuff happening with the chassis. Now, obviously, you've noticed that this bike has a telescopic fork. That is the most visual change on the machine, but there's other stuff happening as well. For example, it now has an axial front caliper instead of a radial caliper that you get on the Speed 400. There are also new tires. These are not radial tires, and they're also taller tires. It's a skinnier 140 section tire compared to the 150 on the Speed, but it's a taller tire, and that has had the effect of raising the ground clearance. Ground clearance is now up to 170 mm, which is a good thing, but seat height has also gone up. Now, the Speed 400 used to be at 790 mm. This is a little above 800 mm seat height. Doesn't sound like a lot, but this is not a short bike anymore, as I'll get Siddhant in here to demonstrate, because I am absolutely useless at showing you what seat heights look like. Siddhant is 5'7", so he's not short, but he's not flat-footed exactly either. Slightly on tiptoes on both ends. Manageable, but not the lowest seat out there anymore. It's not just the ground clearance and the seat height that have changed. Another relevant number is that this motorcycle now has a longer wheelbase. A longer wheelbase generally means lazier riding manners, and Triumph has tried to counteract that by changing the steering geometry. The chassis itself is the same, but the fork clamps are different, and there's also a different axle offset. Now, I haven't ridden it at high speeds on winding roads. We just rode around the city today and it feels very familiar. The same goes for the suspension. They say they've tried to keep the same sort of tune as the Speed 400. The rear shock is different to account for a different sort of weight with the wheel and that new tire. But the overall tuning seems to be very similar. So I don't think you're going to feel a drastic change between Speed 400 and Speed T4 when it comes to suspension, dynamics and comfort. As for braking, again, it's not as sharp. That's because there's a different caliper and it's also using organic pads instead of sintered pads. You still have a decently good lever feel, but you need to put a little more effort into the lever to slow the bike down. Again, this is not a complaint for me because this is a more relaxed motorcycle and the overall brake setup also seems to work well with that character. That about sums up what makes the Speed T4 different to the Speed 400. But before we get to this bike's price, I want to talk you through all the things that have changed in terms of cost cutting. There's quite a list, so I'm going to refer to my phone so I don't forget anything. We've got non-sintered organic pads, axial caliper, we've got non-adjustable levers. There's a different handlebar as well. The Speed 400 gets an aluminium handlebar, this is not. You also have different foot levers on this motorcycle, both for the brake and the gear shifter. They're nice aluminium units there. There's simpler steel units out here. Bias ply tires at both ends. Telescopic fork, which I will get back to. You've got no bar end mirrors. You've gone to simple stem mirrors here. They still look similar. I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think they're a little more practical in our cities where we ride within very tight gaps. There's also no traction control on this motorcycle. And Triumph has removed this aluminium headlamp holder with a regular steel one, but it's got a very nice plastic shroud around. Looks really good. I have no complaints there. And finally, the more affordable Speed T4 also misses out on the Speed 400's engine immobilizer, which was a unique feature at this price point. I think the only feature aspect that could cause this motorcycle some problem is the front fork. Now, performance-wise, this is absolutely fine. But in terms of looks, it makes an already very skinny motorcycle look even more so. That's not a good thing. But most of all though, we all know how important features are in India. And this is a very identifiable feature. This is a feature that lets everybody else know you didn't buy the top-end model. And I wonder how many people are going to be affected by that. I think Triumph should have kept the UST fork here. Everything else is okay. With that being said, let's talk about the price. It's now 2.17 lakh rupees ex-showroom, which on the face of it isn't so great because the Speed 400 used to retail at 2.25 lakhs. And that is an issue of Triumph's own creation because they discounted the Speed 400 for months on end, a good 10,000 rupee discount. So it doesn't feel like the delta is that big. The updated 2024 Speed 400 is now 2.4 lakhs. So yes, there is a 23,000 rupee difference between this T4 and the new Speed 400. But I still don't think that value for money wise, this bike does better. I think the Speed 400 remains phenomenal value. This is just good value. But it goes beyond that. I think you really need to open your mind to what this bike is about. It's not the fastest thing out there. It doesn't have the 40 horsepower. But in my mind, this is a sweeter bike for life in the city. And if that's what you're after, give the Speed T4 a chance because you might just like it more than the Speed 400.